Have a speaker here from Washington, from the Friends Committee on National Legislation. We had had an earlier activity about a month back when we had a peace walk here in Auburn, at the time when there was a lot of planning going into a possible bombing attack in Syria. And it was very encouraging to us to see the kind of response that we got around Auburn. A lot of people seem to think that our message, which was "war is not the answer," was a good message and was the right course of action. And we may have played a very small part in the kind of popular expressions that I think played a big role in the ultimate outcome, which was not bombing. More recently, the crisis has been the fiscal crisis, and the thinking of our committee was very much in harmony, again, with the thinking of the Friends Committee on National Legislation in Washington, that there's too much money going into military spending, especially at a time when our nation is in crisis and doesn't have enough money, enough income to meet all the obligations that the country has taken on. So we came up with the idea of seeing if we could have a speaker on this subject. And we're just delighted to have Ms. Tila from the Friends Committee on National Legislation. And Tila has just arrived literally minutes directly from the Syracuse airport. By way of introduction, Tila, before joining the Friends Committee on National Legislation, she served as the Executive Director of the Peace Economy Project in St. Louis. This is a nonprofit that researches and educates about military spending, raising awareness about where our tax dollars are invested and calling for a reinvestment in our communities. In that position, Tila sought to build relationships with human needs and racial justice groups in order to incorporate a broader perspective on the issue of military spending. Since August of 2012, Ms. Neguse has been a legislative associate on domestic issues with the Friends Committee on National Legislation. Please join me in welcoming Tila Neguse.
Thank you. Yes, I'm very, very happy to be here, and thank you, Andy, for inviting me. And yes, I was literally just came from the airport. I was supposed to arrive around 4:30, and they kept delaying the flight. So I still got here at the nick of time. Like Andy said, I work at the Friends Committee on National Legislation. And my broader portfolio of issues is just domestic issues in general, but I work specifically on our federal budget campaign, and our federal budget campaign is focused on cutting military spending and reinvesting into our communities. The way we choose to talk about military spending, cutting military spending at FCNL, is through the lens that we need to cut military spending and we need to boost funding for programs that help the most vulnerable among us. So today I wanted to come and talk about Pentagon spending in general and give an overview of what's going on with the shutdown and sequestration and all the craziness that I'm sure everyone hears about going on in Washington and Congress right now. I thought I'd lay out some goals, but I think I might skip over the first one, which I thought I might go over some federal budget basics, but I don't think we need to do that. I think I can skip right to the current fiscal crisis, and then I want to talk about how much we spend on the military and the next steps and where to go from here. And please feel free. I'm going to try to go through the information quickly, but stop me if I'm going too fast. And I want to leave a lot of time for questions and discussion because a lot of this is content heavy and number heavy, but I just want to provide some kind of framework for us to have like a meaningful discussion. So, let's go over. Okay, so what happened, I'll start with talking about what happened to get us to where we are right now. So, Congress has not passed a budget in 4 years, and we are right now under the automatic across-the-board cuts known as sequestration. We are also in the 2 weeks, almost over 2 weeks into a shutdown, and tomorrow we are going to default on our debt if we do not, if Congress does not act. So, I wanted to say what would happen in a normal year. Like I said, Congress hasn't passed a budget in 4 years. Normally, what would happen is that in February, the president would submit a budget request to Congress. This year, the president was 2 months late on his budget request. He submitted it in April. So, in thinking about the federal budget timeline in a normal year, it's important to understand why things are so tense right now and why we are in the situation we are right now. So, the president did submit this year his budget request until April, even though it should have been submitted in February. And then, in a normal year, March, the House and the Senate would, the budget committees of the House and the Senate would review the president's request, and they would each write their versions of the budget resolution. And then each of the separate chambers in the House and the Senate would pass a budget resolution. Then come April, the House and Senate would come together a conference to agree on a joint budget resolution. So they would talk about, well, we want to spend this money on this, and the Senate may say, I don't want to spend this on this, and they'd come to an agreement. And both chambers would approve the resolution. And then we would have a joint budget resolution. Then in May and June, the appropriations committees, which are the committees that actually, a budget resolution is more of a broad framework saying that we think we should spend the money here. When it comes to appropriations, it's individual bills that say we need to spend X amount of dollars on Head Start, we need to spend X amount of dollars on food stamps, et cetera, et cetera. So in May and June, the Appropriations Committee would allocate spending levels and start writing their different bills. Then in around May, June, and July, appropriation subcommittees and committees would all meet, talk about the different bills. And then in August, they would approve all the spending bills. And in August and September, the House and Senate would come together, talk about what each of them had done, and create a reconciled version. And then in September, they would have review these bills and approve each single bill, and then the president would sign it into law. And that's September 3rd, and then October 1st begins the new fiscal year. And we would have a budget. That did not happen this year, and has not happened in 4 years, actually. Where's the budget now? So we've been running on what is called continuing resolutions, which are temporary funding measures. When we don't have a budget, Congress must pass a continuing resolution to continue to fund the government. The current continuing resolution expired on September 30th of this year, so approximately 2 weeks ago. Right now, the House and the Senate cannot agree on a continuing resolution to fund the government, and so the government has shut down. The debt limit will be reached in mid-October, and then as on top of that, another round of sequestration. The automatic across-the-board cuts is set to begin at the end of the year, unless they come up with a replacement for sequestration. So, sequestration, have people heard of sequestration? I always forget, I don't know what, people use this term outside of Washington, but sequestration is the indiscriminate mechanism that automatically cuts all discretionary spending by $1.2 trillion over the next 10 years, split evenly between defense spending and non-defense spending, or Pentagon domestic spending. The sequester began this year on March 1st, and unless it is repealed or replaced, we have another round of sequestration that's going to take place at the end of the year. Sequestration is a very aggressive way to find savings and to cut the budget. It was never meant to be an effective policy tool for reducing the deficit or for making spending reductions. Sequestration was written into law, and it was supposed to be so terrible that it would trigger the two different parties to come together and actually do something, because they said, we're going to write something into this law that's so terrible that it would obviously never happen. And what's happening right now is that sequestration, it hasn't been a full year, it's been a couple months of sequestration, and so it's becoming kind of a new normal, and that's not good, because it does need to be replaced. I'll talk a little bit more later about what has happened today with the debt ceiling and shutdown bills that the House and Senate are working on right now, and also what that means for sequestration. Sequestration does need to be replaced. It's not a policy that should be in place. So government shutdown, what happened? So on October 1st, 2013, federal government shut down because Congress failed to do its job of passing a budget for the fiscal year 2014. Both the House and the Senate passed two different versions of the temporary spending bills known as continuing resolutions, or CRs, that were supposed to keep the government running. But the House's version would have prevented the implementation and funding of the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, and Democrats in the Senate did not approve of this measure. So the two chambers couldn't agree on a short-term bill to keep the government running. Like I said before, usually a CR, a continuing resolution, is a must-pass piece of legislation that has no policy riders. So what should have happened was that the House wrote a continuing resolution that all it did was fund the government, and then the Senate should have passed it. And they could have had the discussions about the Affordable Care Act and about all the other different policy issues that House Republicans have with different legislation separate from this conversation. But they chose to kind of rope all of this in together when they are unrelated. The Affordable Care Act is not related to funding the government. These two issues are very separate. Why happened? So Republicans in the House attached a list of, I repeat, unrelated demands to the continuing resolution. And Democrats in the Senate also failed to pass a single appropriations bill this year, and they were supposed to pass 12. The House only passed four of the 12, but the Senate didn't pass one at all. So it's mishaps on both sides. So the outcome, government operations, I'm sure you've heard, have halted across the country, and this includes nutrition, healthcare, Head Start programs, Habitat for Humanity. I have a list of what I call the human impacts of the shutdown. So the National Institute of Health is turning about 200 new patients away from potentially life-saving treatment every week. I think I made this list because I wanted to kind of compile a list of stories that were out there about the real impacts of what's going on with the shutdown. Because I think it seems like it's a political game, and it's only furloughed worker. It's not just people being furloughed; it's also a combination of real hurtful impacts to people who are already hurting, and to agencies that were already had cash-strapped budgets on top of everything else that it's doing. The government stopped paying out TANF, or temporary assistance for needed family grants, to states. And Arizona opted to stop sending benefits to families, leaving 5,200 families without assistance indefinitely. U.S. parks are losing $76 million each day. Senior centers around the country are struggling to keep up with their Meals on Wheels and congregate meal services. Nutrition assistance for women, infants, and children, or WIC, the WIC program, is threatened. What's happening with WIC is that WIC has already, because of sequestration, has seen a lot of cuts. WIC provides nutrition assistance to women and children in need. And so now with the government shutdown, the budget is becoming strapped again. And WIC has already said by the end of October, if this continues, they will have no more funds to accept any new recipients. So that's a pretty horrible thing to hear, and a scary thing to happen. The debt ceiling. So let me say first, the debt ceiling is also a separate issue from the government shutdown that began on October 1st. because of the timing of the shutdown and when the debt ceiling